Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and I am a comic book artist who recently finished a comic book series called Puppy Love, and today I want to take you through the process of how I make my comics and what I find to be the most streamlined and effective way to finish your comics and finish them fast. So my series contains 3 different parts, all of which have 24 pages and are all black and white. Puppy Love was my first comic book series that I've actually done in black and white, and it was also my first comic book series that I've done traditionally. And honestly, it was really fun for me to work with. Originally, I wanted to draw out the entire series in 1 week for one of my earlier videos, but seeing as how I made the script a little too long, I decided to break it up into 3 equal sections. The first thing I do when I create comics is have an idea, and in my case, I was drawing on a TikTok live stream and someone suggested drawing a goth dog. So I drew my main character, Sammy, and from there she was stuck in my head until I could come up with an excuse to give her a story and later draw it. After you have your initial idea, it's always best to write out a script. And I hear a lot of artists talk about how they are bad at writing scripts, but if you want to be a good comic artist, you really need to have a solid idea and storyline to be able to tell the story you want to tell. Some tips that might be helpful to you is the fact that you don't actually need to write out a script like a novel or a professional writer. You just have to have a small idea of what is going to be happening so you can keep track of your character settings and have a solid dialogue set up. I know a lot of the time it's also hard for people to just have to sit down at a computer and type everything out, so I also suggest just writing it out on paper. Personally, I like to write out all my stories in advance so I have a solid idea of how long it's going to take to draw the script. With Puppy Love, I ended up with about 24 pages of art for every 3 full pages of script. And with the knowledge of my page conversion rate, I was able to draw out the pages in about 2 to 3 weeks for each part. After I have the script, I move on to storyboarding. And I love storyboarding. It's probably one of my favorite things to do in the process since it's not so serious and I don't have to make things perfect. I also storyboard the entire project first, and my reasoning for this is that it actually really helps with time management throughout the entire project. Since I have a solid idea of how many pages there are later on in the steps, it's easier for me to say I only need to line 3 pages today to meet the quota for the deadlines I have set for myself, rather than me drawing the art and just doing what I think is enough for that day. I actually tried both methods of this for the different parts of Puppy Love I was working on just to see what would work better and faster for the different parts. The first 2 parts I did the way I mentioned earlier, while part 1 took me a week and part 2 took me 2 weeks to finish, mostly because I didn't have a week deadline for the second part. But for part 3, I ended up drawing the storyboards and inking and doing typography and just everything all in one sitting, and I ended up taking closer to 3 weeks just to finish it. I think the reason it took me longer to finish this is because I would have to sit and look at the page for a longer amount of time rather than moving on and getting a fresh set of eyes when I would need to come back to it. And when you sit and look at something for an extended period of time, of course you're going to find issues and inconsistencies with what you're working on. So I find it best to do what I was there to do in the first place and then just move on when I'm finished. Because in the end, it's not going to look like trash, it's going to look about the same as if you had just moved on. And it takes a lot less time for you to finish the project. After the storyboards, I move on to the line art. And this step usually takes me like a decent amount of time to finish, especially if I'm working by hand. I can always make edits and fixes digitally, but it's something I'd really prefer not to do. So I just end up spending an insane amount of time on line art just regardless of whatever process I have. This, if you were wondering, is one of my least favorite steps to do in the entire comic making process. It takes way too much time depending on, if you're working digitally or traditionally. It's just gonna take time. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It takes time, and patience is not my best attribute, so that's just, I don't like it. Then from the line art, if I were to have color in my comic, I then add all of the base colors and none of the secondary coloring. The reason I do this is because I really find that the more time I spend looking at a singular page, the more time I end up wasting and the longer it takes to draw my comic. So I do the base color for all of the pages, and then I move on to the shading and color variations before doing final touch-ups and heavy-duty lighting and shading. These steps I skipped for Puppy Love, and I opted to switch them out for final detail work. So my goth dog, Sammy, she has filled in black wristbands, a tank top, and, she also has dyed hair as well for most of the series. And so this is when I would go in with that final detail pen and just fill in all of those black bits with that felt tip pen. I did that as well as adding any details I forgot to draw in, like maybe a tail or two, or even adding backgrounds to scenes and pages that I think looked a little bare. As soon as the detail work was done, I moved on to the actual worst part of the process that I really tend to dislike: typography. I spell things wrong. A lot. And it's always a pain for me to have someone like check over my spelling, but it's unfortunately a necessary step I need. That, and on top of the fact that the art program I use doesn't have spell check for you, you know, so it's just an insane amount of effort I have to put into something that should be easy, but it's just not for me. This is fine if I'm drawing digitally, since I can just copy paste the already spell checked script, but if you happen to be doing everything, you know, by hand, it's something that's particularly hard for me to do correctly. I have a mini comic/children's book that literally only has 2 words in it, and I spelled them both wrong on my first go around. So if that doesn't tell you anything about how hard I struggle to spell things properly, I don't know what will. And after that, the printing process is up to you. This is going to take you just as long as it did to write the comic in the first place. And I will say, if you're working with a company to self-publish, they usually always want their files in PDFs, as well as having all the files be the correct sizes already for the size of the comic you want printed. So if you want to save yourself a lot of time and hassle, save all of your files as PDFs and make them, like, convert the pixels to inches, and I promise you it's going to make the printing process so much easier. Personally, for Puppy Love, I ended up taking a lot of high-resolution pictures of individual pages, and then I ended up editing them later on. So if I needed touch-ups or to make any of my art, like, contrast a little bit, this was my last time to do it. Overall, I would say when all is said and done, the entire process from start to finish for one part would take me about 2 weeks' time, if everything was streamlined like the first 2 parts I was working on for Puppy Love. Of course, this process does vary from story to story, as well as what kind of art style you're using. My art from Puppy Love is very basic as far as things go, while my art from different comics is a lot more in-depth and detailed. But this process really does work for me and helps me manage my time as best as I possibly can. So what are you waiting for? Go and draw that comic today! Hey there, I hope you enjoyed my video. If you want to see any of my comics for free, check out my website, mattybites.com. There you can get website exclusive updates on future videos, comic plans, and so much more. There, of course, are all the comics I have worked on except for a few shop exclusive comics, Puppy Love. Check out my personal favorite, Saltwater and Taffy. And if you want to support an artist a step further, you can take a look at my shop where you'll find handmade goods by me and my friend, as well as my comic Puppy Love parts 1 through 3. I hope you all have a great day, and thank you so much again for watching.